From the studios at Sapere Law and Mediation, this is the Splitting Smart podcast. Today's special guest is my longtime friend of over 20 years, Denny Brewer. Denny is a powerhouse in the world of family law and faith-based advocacy, and he's been practicing law since 1980, and he's a board-certified family law specialist. Denny is also the general counsel and executive pastor at Fellowship Church in Grapevine, Texas, and of C3 Global, where he's dedicated nearly 18 years to serving churches, clergy, and religious organizations nationwide. And if that's not enough, Denny's a newly published author, having co-authored the book Back to Court, a complete guide to child custody litigation, which provides practical insights for navigating child custody cases after divorce. We're fortunate to have him here today to share his unique perspectives on how faith and family law intersect. Well, Denny Brewer, welcome and thank you for joining me today. I wish you were here in studio, but so happy to have you.
Thank you, Kelly. Great to be with you.
You've got such a great background with a beautiful intersection between the law and faith. So tell me a little bit about your career path in the law. Let's start out with that.
So really, it starts when I was a kid. My dad was a trial lawyer and very effective one. And it's kind of like learning the trade of your parent. You do that somewhat vicariously and just through osmosis. Growing up, I'd go down to the courthouse with my father. Wasn't sure if I really wanted to be a lawyer for a long time, but did eventually go to law school. And when I came out, I went to work for Denny Brewer Sr. He was somewhat of a legend in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, old school trial lawyer. And I got thrown into just about everything from jail calls to workers' comp cases, PI cases, family law cases, criminal cases. And I enjoyed the courtroom. So I wanted to gravitate towards a field that got me in the courtroom a lot. And some people may not realize, but family law probably gets you there more than any area. The first 5 years did a little bit of everything and got a really great broad, let's say, education in and out of the courtroom in the various areas of practice. In my fifth year, I'd tried enough lawsuits, worked on an appeal that actually went up to the Texas Supreme Court, and that qualified me to take an exam for specialization. So after 5 years, I took the exam, went through the process, became board certified as a specialist in family law. That really set the tone for me for the next 20, 25 years or so. Family law entails a lot of different types of cases. Divorce is the bread and butter, frankly. It was relatively new, a new concept back when I first became certified. Being a family law specialist was minimum requirement as far as I was concerned, if I was going to recommend a family law attorney to someone. So the other thing about it, Kelly, and I know this is the case in California, you're required to continue your education. And for a board certified specialist, you have to take a lot more continuing legal education courses. The law changes constantly, so you got to keep up. You may know the law inside out coming out of law school, and 2 years later, there could be some significant changes. 10 years later, probably been a lot of changes. So you got to keep up.
All right.
We begin doing what we would call loosely church law, and it really evolved out of our trial practice. We had some ministries whose cart was in the ditch, so to speak, and they hired us to help them. And as we began to work with more and more similar organizations, it became apparent to me that a lot of the churches were still operating the back office like a mom and pop shop, frankly. And we became associated with an organization called the American Center for Law and Justice, which I actually serve on the board of that organization. It's a fabulous organization founded by Jay Sekulow and Stuart Roth. These gentlemen, they've argued a number of cases before the United States Supreme Court and fight for religious liberty. And So that got us more and more into that world of church law.
So here you are, all of a sudden, going from family law, which is its own weird little world sometimes, and morphing and including church law. I mean, obviously they're not the same, but so is this how you kind of started making this crossover into what you're doing today?
Yeah, and so I'm now the ultimate oxymoron, Kelly. I'm an attorney who's a licensed minister. I know that's very hard to accept for a lot of people. My family and I began attending Fellowship Church when it was a little startup church in Irving, Texas, just outside of DFW Airport, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. And I became more and more involved, which was probably the best thing that I did in my life after my salvation and marrying Sue Day. And eventually, I was asked whether I would consider coming on staff, something I never thought I would do, to basically run the business side, if you will, of the church. And so I didn't have to think about it or pray about it very long. I knew that's what I was supposed to do. Fellowship is a church that has a great heart for the local church. So, in addition to having several campuses here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have an association of churches called C3 Global. We work with several hundred churches, and I get the opportunity to wear my C3 Global hat and work with some of the greatest pastors in the world that look to C3 Global for not only best practices, but for a network.
From when you joined Fellowship, well, how big a church was it at the time, to when where you are now? Just so people get an idea if they're not familiar. I mean, obviously, when we're talking about multi-campuses, it infers that's a big church. But so people really can appreciate the magnitude, let me show off Fellowship for just a second. How big is it? What was it when you started, and what are we looking at now?
We're in a big metropolitan area, and our feeling is that if you're in a big metropolitan area, you should have a big church, and it should be growing, because as we all know, there's a lot of people that they don't know Christ that drive by the church once they get up on Sunday mornings. So we want to grow the church. We're still trying our best to grow the church, but Fellowship Church started as a very small startup church in Irving, Texas, met in rented facilities in the Irving Arts Center, of all places. And it was a unique setting in that it had a theater type feel because that's what it was, the venue. And the first year or two began to rapidly grow. It just started with a handful of families that were out of First Baptist Church Irving, which is a great Baptist church in South Irving. They wanted to have a presence in North Irving. They brought Ed Young in from Houston. Ed grew up in the Carolinas. His dad took a position down in Houston at a great church, Second Baptist Church, probably the largest Baptist church, maybe the largest Protestant church in the country. He was quite the basketball player. Exposed him to another world, you might say. And when he was called into the ministry, he really saw church through the eyes of some of his playing mates that were very unchurched, and said, if I'm ever actually called and I have the opportunity to start a church, I want it to be a place where everybody can feel comfortable coming. And I want to outreach. I want to reach out and bring people into the church. So that was the thought behind many other things, a very solid theology, I might add, and stylistically a little different, a little upbeat. And the church just grew like crazy. So when Sude and I first visited there, it was around 90, 91. The church was already being talked about. We knew very early that's where we needed to plant our family. And it gradually outgrew the Irving Arts Center. We eventually scraped up enough money and built our facility out there, and now the rest has been history.
Hey, friends, if you're enjoying the content, do me a favor. If you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe and the like button. Same thing if you're just listening to it as an audio podcast on your podcast provider. When you follow, like, and subscribe, it helps us get this vital information out to lots of other people just like you who are grappling with conflict and family issues. And, we really want to help you and others because at the end of the day, it helps families. If you'd like to get early bird advance info on when new episodes and products are dropping, go ahead and head on over to the show notes wherever you're listening or watching, and you'll find a link there that says, sign me up for the insider email list. Thanks again for listening. It means the world to us. And just so people understand, as we talked about what your exposure is to people of faith going through divorce, on average, any given weekend, can you give me an estimate of what you think the average attendance is total across all the venues?
Yeah. I mean, it would be anywhere from, don't hold me to this, don't get me in trouble, but 15 to 25,000. Kelly, we have about 40,000 members. And, these days, a lot of the population, they don't go to church every weekend. On the occasions like Christmas or Easter, when we have, everybody's going to show up typically for Easter and Christmas. We'll have a very large crowd.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we juxtapose 40,000 members. Let's just call it that for a minute. People are attending online and actually at the campuses.
Right.
And then how many years did you practice family law?
So 25.
Okay. So 25 years of family law. I'm making the point in the case here that Denny Brewer is intimately familiar with the struggles going on in the church membership. And so clearly, Denny and I have a Christian faith background. Now, our listeners may have a different faith background, but what we're here to say is we value faith, right? Whatever your faith is, there's going to be an impact on it when you go through a divorce. And we want to give you some tips and insight on that. It's going to be through the Christian perspective. If you're Jewish, if you're of another faith, I still want you to listen because you're going to hear some things that are very valuable to you. So let's start, Denny, with the impact to someone's faith when they are the initiator of a divorce. So what kinds of things, you share, I'll share, but we'll start with you. What kind of things have you seen when someone has decided to take that step and they're a person of faith and start through the divorce process?
So Kelly, if I'm wearing my attorney hat, right? When that person steps into my office, there are studies that will back what I'm about to say up, I believe. They've already mentally gone through the process several times. So they've pretty much decided this is what they have to do in their minds. Now, I will always start, really regardless of who I'm dealing with, exploring, is there any reasonable expectation of a reconciliation? Is there any possibility that you can work on the marriage? And I sometimes very pointedly, sometimes very gently point out that the stats will tell us that your greatest chance of success in your marriage is the one that you're in now. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that, but I try to make the point that if you can work this marriage out, you need to do so. Now, there are occasions where a client will come in. It's very obvious that they have to get out of the situation. Have I had a client or clients that I would go, no, you need to tee it up and go to the courthouse and duke it out? That is a rare exception where I would encourage that. But I've had that happen. That person has been so beaten down that they've been abused so badly during the marriage. I'll just be frank. Usually it's the woman. That's not always the case, but married to a very strong alpha male. And I've been in a lot of those cases, and they're emotionally destroyed and they need a win. This is an exception. The general rule is that no, you don't want to go to court. You want to work this out. You want to work it out as amicably as possible. So when the person comes in, Kelly, and let me try to get a little more to the point of your question, that's a Christian, they're going to have issues that a lot of other people won't have with filing suit for divorce. A number of Christians are raised such that divorce is the ultimate sin. On the other hand, they have this great God that they can look to that will help them through the process. So you might say on one hand, it's a terrible disadvantage and they're going to deal with some problems that others will not deal with. On the other hand, they've got their relationship with God, and there's never a better time to lean on God and lean on your faith to get you through what is going to be a very difficult situation.
To your point, I think what's happening in that situation, so you're the filer, and let's talk about the person who's filing for divorce, not under domestic violence circumstances. So you're the filer for some other reason, right? But you got a faith background. And to your point, like you said, Denny, you were raised in that scenario where getting a divorce is like a capital murder, right? In the sin department. There's going to be, or there may be, a sense of shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the natural reaction when you're engaged in a church, a faith family, faith community, what do we see the natural reaction when there's the shame piece coming in? It's to pull back. It's to isolate. It's to be afraid of judgment in the community. You've seen that, haven't you?
Absolutely.
That fear. We were talking the other day, and I think it's really, really a good thing to talk about. There's an assumption, I think, on some people's part that if they find out at church that I'm getting a divorce, I'm going to be ostracized or looked down upon and judged. But what is the reality? I mean, I think it still goes on in probably smaller churches and faith communities, but let's say somebody comes in and they're going to fellowship church and they think, I can't go back to church. I'm so ashamed. Maybe they've had an affair, okay? I mean, let's just get down to brass tacks. Happens all the time. Somebody of faith has an affair and then they decide that the grass is greener, right? And so they go down the road of divorce. And then because of that, they alienate themselves from church. I'm going to say a lot of times people realize that's not the right route to go, but they still don't feel like they can go back to church. Are they going to be judged? Even if they haven't said a word to anybody about why they're getting divorced, are they going to be judged at Fellowship Church?
You know, Kelly, I think one of the greatest tools of the enemy, if you will, is to make us feel like we're dealing with some problem that's very unique. Nobody else would really understand. Nobody really knows what I'm going through. You and I have had the discussion about how many times have we had someone come into our office for a divorce and say, no one's going to believe me. Everybody's going to believe my spouse. They have no idea what actually goes on. If they only knew, there's a whole nother side. And unfortunately, that's true in a lot of cases. And what I try to tell that client without offending them or downplaying what they're going through is that, look, every situation is unique, but I've heard that so many times. You need to understand that, no, you're not the only one that's dealing with this kind of situation. In the church, the reality is that if you ask for a show of hands, how many people sitting here have been in a divorce or had someone very close to you and your family go through divorce, most of the hands would go up. That maybe used to not be the case. An even more troubling stat is that the divorce rate among Christians is about equal to non-Christians. Now, I'll tell you where you see a difference there. If you've, and there are studies that will back this up, what I'm about to say. If you're a couple that attends church regularly, you revolve your life around the only institution that Jesus built, the church, your marriage will be much stronger and be much less likely to see a divorce court. If you pray together as a couple, it drastically drops the divorce rate, does. So there are going to be people in that church that are really doing it the way all need to be doing it, that are going to be the exception to the rule. And they're not going to have that, 50-50 chance of ending up in a divorce court. But the point I'm trying to make here is that people really do understand more than you think they do. And for those who don't understand, just give it enough time, because eventually they're going to deal with it either directly or indirectly, a family dispute that leads to a divorce. And they're just going to become a lot more understanding of what really goes on, the dynamics. And sometimes you have to get out of the marriage.
Those are such great points. And I think you're so right that the world and the enemy, the main goal is to get us out of our faith and out of community. Because when you're doing church together, when we see statistics that say couples that are in church together and praying together, their marriages statistically are stronger and last longer and have less of the issues that we see in the divorce world, it's because that is a form of working on your marriage.
Absolutely.
Just like, the non-church world will say all day long, yeah, date night. Where do you think date night came from? Anyway, make sure you go out on a date once a week. You have to work on your marriage, which is absolutely true. Marriage is like anything else. It's a living, breathing thing. It has to be nurtured in order to really thrive and grow. And that's what goes on in a healthy church community. Now, you and I both know there are some unhealthy church communities out there,
Right.
because
Yeah.
they're run by human beings. If you've initiated a divorce, you may kind of get caught up in the culture. I'd call it the old school culture of shame, and feel like nobody else will, they'll judge you and disapprove of you. I don't love the fact that most or half the hands will go up if we ask on Sunday, how many of you have been divorced? I don't love that, but I love the fact that there is connection and understanding there,
Absolutely.
really beautiful. Okay, well, what about the person who is on the flip side of this deal? And for example, I've seen this client a million times, and at any given time, we have a client in this position. So let me give you what his avatar looks like. He's been married for 37 years, and he's retired a couple of years ago, and just now starting to enjoy his pension and things of that nature. And wife says, "I'm done." But they've been lifelong, faith-based people, and they know I'm imperfect in the marriage, right? And there's probably things we don't know, but he's devastated and can't imagine his life without wife, right? The wife says, "I'm done. I'm done putting up with you. I'm done with whatever else has gone on. I can't forgive this thing 25 years ago or 10 years ago." And she files, and he's pleading, "Can we go to counseling?" "No, I'm not interested." So we see those situations where one's just like, "No, I'm done." And even if they've tried counseling in the past, it may have been 1 or 2 times, and, I'm not willing to do it anymore. So he doesn't want it. What do we see as the negative impacts to that person's faith? What are the reactions we often see when this is someone who feels like they've done it right and this is still happening to them?
Well, I'll tell you, Kelly, I'm big on faith-based counseling. You can get counseling from your pastor up to a point, and it's great biblical counseling. But when you're going through a divorce, I think oftentimes you ultimately want to lean on a great faith-based licensed counselor if you're dealing with a lot of issues, and often you are. There are great Christian counselors out there. There are great licensed counselors, and that know how to deal with that situation. As the lawyer, I'm going to try to encourage that person to let me deal with the legal issues. One of the things that happens there is that person, a lot of times they want to give up. They don't want to protect their own interests. They're just so devastated. And I'm not suggesting that I want to throw them into a fight, but I want to make sure that their rights are protected. And how they feel that particular moment is probably going to be different how they feel in 2 years. I really want them to have a lawyer that's going to fight for them. Now, and again, I don't mean start throwing low blows, but I mean, make sure they understand what their rights are. If there's children, there's a lot more complexity involved. Texas, California, we have different marital property laws, but still there are a lot of factors that can be considered that impact how the estate gets divided.
Yeah.
And it's the most important financial situation you'll ever find yourself in, unless you've done something that puts half of your estate in jeopardy or more.
Right. And so here we are, a person of faith, and we don't want it to end. And I think what you're getting at is the attitude of, first of all, it must be my fault that this is happening. I've seen the idea creep in that God must be punishing me. And I'll do anything to save my marriage. So I'll give her everything under the sun, even though I still have minor children that need to be taken care of. She can have the house, no equalization for the house, right? Here in California, our homes are worth a ridiculous amount of money, and we tend to have a ridiculous amount of equity if we've kept them for any given period of time. But we've seen it where, okay, the house has $800,000 of equity in it, but I got 2 kids to raise here, and you can have my pension too up to this point, my retirement, keep the 401ks. Because we were feeling guilty. We're going to win them back through being a doormat. And they're not thinking about the future, right? So I think that's kind of what you're getting at as far as the rights. We can get a lot of sympathy in our church community. When we come and tell the story, my wife left me. I was a faithful husband all these years, and she left me. What are we doing? There can be a lot of attention that is garnered when we start to share to the extent of it's feeding us living in a victim place. Yeah. So now, I wrote a book on this issue, Victim Is Not Your Name, and it's about the victim habits. And I'm sure you've seen it both so as you're sitting over here in the church leadership, forget your attorney hat for a minute. How often have you seen that, and how hard is it for the church leadership to recognize when someone is really kind of wallowing in it at that point?
Yeah, and I would encourage the churches out there to have a divorce recovery ministry, and it's going to be very important to pick the right person or persons to lead that. It's easy to wallow in that, and it's also easy not to forgive. And Kelly, you and I know that unforgiveness is a very unhealthy thing for the victim. We're not supposed to be victims though, right? But you know what I'm saying? It's an irony, isn't it, that even when you've been the party that's tried to do everything right, and your spouse has cheated on you or abused you or whatever, that's a very hard place to go to forgive.
Yeah.
But it actually hurts you more than it does the bad guy over there. So I think that's a huge thing to try to get through in a divorce setting, and the church can play a huge role in that. At the same time, you cannot coddle someone who's just wallowing in it. No, you got to help get them out of that. And we have something that gets preached a lot at Fellowship Church. Have the right they in your life. They're tough. They're honest. They're enthusiastic, and they're yielded to God. And they're strong influencers in your life if you allow it. Iron sharpens iron. You want to be around those people, especially at a time when you're going through a divorce.
Absolutely, because I just love these issues about forgiveness, and then also being in the community and having the right they. We're talking about the inner circle, and I talk about that quite a bit on the podcast, but having that right inner circle. And you don't want to be in the victim role because you're missing out on what your true calling is in the future. You can't always, this is ridiculous, I do this all the time, but I'll say to people, look, your future's out here in front of you. And when you have a spiritual life, you'll find out that you have a creator that's got a plan for this future and a calling for you on it. And the calling changes over the years sometimes. But if you're so busy hanging out in the past and in the victim thing, this is what you're doing to your future. We're just standing here
Right.
or at the past, and we got our back turned to that future. I think part of this victim piece here, if we're the person not wanting it, well, and even if you're the person that initiated it because you felt like you didn't have a choice, sometimes there's a huge amount of anger that starts to develop against the right they. Haven't you seen the right they, the inner circle, come in and go, wait a minute, let's remember who your creator is, who created this
Absolutely.
situation, and who their creator is. I think that's one of the most powerful roles that they can assist with in this kind of a situation. Hey, friend, if you or someone you love has gone through some recent life challenges, or maybe you're in the middle of one right now, whether that be a challenge with your health or a relationship challenge, perhaps a marriage is ending, I want you to know I wrote a book for you and that loved one. And it's called Victim is Not Your Name. In this book, I describe 6 victim habits that you and most other people tend to get into unknowingly. And these are the kinds of habits, which are just behavioral patterns, mindset patterns that keep you in a place that keeps you stuck and keeps you in a place of deterioration within the challenge that you're facing. I also provide you 6 key strategies for disrupting those victim habits and getting you out of that place and back to a place where you can start to remember and rediscover your true identity, who you were meant to be, who you were made to be, and your purpose in life. It's not in being a victim. Victim is Not Your Name is available to you right now on Amazon. Grab yourself and your loved ones copies today. I'm very honored to be able to present this material to you. I know it's going to help.
And Kelly, you make your misery your ministry. You rise out of that, and it puts you in a very unique position to help other people. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we should ever want to go through something that's bad, whether it's divorce or losing a loved one. If and when it happens, then take advantage of the opportunity, use that. You can help other people in a huge way.
You got to get through it. And listen, the great faith-based psychiatrist of the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl, we talk about him in my victim book. He pointed out that people in the Holocaust who were the survivors that he noticed and that he worked with, those folks, the difference was they asked a different question. Not why did this happen to me? Why am I going through this? Why does God hate me so much? They asked a different question, and it was, what's my assignment in all of this? What is my assignment here? Those were the people who survived the most because they were connecting with their creator and saying, what's my assignment now and in the future? And because they were mentally able to look to the future and not be back here and I don't want to call it wallowing because I'm not minimizing the Holocaust whatsoever.
Right.
But it was a tool and a scenario that I think was a divine scenario that allowed their minds to be so strong that it carried the rest of their physicality through the torment, and they survived. And so, like you say, make your misery your ministry. And the only way we can do that is if we ask, what's the assignment?
Yeah, I love that, Kelly. That is so powerful. And you kind of hate to say this in a way, but I've learned my best lessons in life through difficult times, going through a crisis, and it's and the Bible talks about that as well. So it shouldn't come unexpected. We're going to go through some difficult times. We are. We can either let it knock us down or we can come out stronger.
Our choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
And forgiveness, we should do another whole episode on forgiveness, because there's so many facets to it. But in the interest of time, what I can say on that is it is worth investing the time in learning about forgiveness and what it really means, what it's not, and what it truly is, because it's a game changer. And for children,
Yeah.
a parent that is holding, harboring all the grief and the grudge, uh, it affects the children as well. How can our church leaders uh, play a positive role for someone who's going through a divorce situation, a divorce crisis?
Yeah. Again, I say use your membership. You've got people in your church that have gone through a divorce, some who've gone through terribly difficult divorce. Hopefully you know them, and they came through in a mighty way. Let them mentor these people. Try to get them together. And again, it could be in a classroom where you're having as I mentioned earlier, a divorce recovery ministry, or it could be one-on-one. I tend to want to see that pastor provide some biblical counseling, and there's a lot of great biblical counseling on the subject. But I think once you've had several meetings, maybe 2 or 3, I think you want to pass that to someone who's very well equipped, either because they went through the experience and they handled it extremely well, or that they do it for a living, that they're a professional counselor.
And even when we've got the situation where one spouse has left, right? The importance of getting therapy and counseling. I don't know about you, but every client that walks through our doors as either a regular litigation divorce client, or they're coming through our doors for divorce mediation, one of the first things we say is the way you will get through this process in the least damaging way possible, and maybe in a healthy way, is if you not only keep yourself, your body fit, but you keep this fit up here. And so all of these things where your faith is being challenged, where it's being threatened, really, where your self-doubt is happening, depression, run, don't walk to a qualified therapist. And if you're a faith-based person, run, don't walk to a faith-based therapist, because they'll understand all those nuances we're talking about today. I'll put something up during the episode here on divorce recovery. When Denny's talking about divorce recovery, that's actually a program that has been implemented nationwide. It's probably international at this point in many churches. And it is a program for people in the church who are going through divorce and are having a hard time with it. And it's a beautiful, supportive, understanding program. And so I'm sure Fellowship has it. My church has it. A lot of the churches are using it, and it is fantastic. So that's good. Okay. And we want the listeners, if you're going through divorce, we want you to hear about what does productive church leadership look like when it comes to divorce. And let's talk about what it looks like when it's negative. And Denny and I would probably tell you, if you're experiencing some of these things, I hate to tell people to leave the church, but you may need to leave the church and find a different church if this kind of stuff is going on. So what do we see when they're playing a negative role? We've got people going through some really rough times in a divorce. What kinds of things do you see, Denny?
Well, yeah, it's just going to make the situation worse. Now, I have to say this, Kelly, the church can't wink at divorce. Someone comes up and says, well, I want out of the marriage just because I'm not happy and I want to be happy. Well, can I just say that's ridiculous? That's pathetic. That's not a reason to divorce, right? You don't just go, yeah, everybody's getting a divorce, so, we accept that here. No, I mean, you want to encourage the right thing. Divorce is, there's a lot of collateral damage, even beyond the immediate family. But once it's happening and it's going through, or maybe it's just been completed, you want to help that person out. I'm seeing less of that, Kelly. But over the years, I've certainly seen situations where the person was the scarlet letter was slapped on the back, figuratively speaking, uh, and maybe ostracized, maybe brought up, in front of the entire church. I don't believe that that's biblical, frankly. I don't. You're going to get through it if you take the right steps, and if the church is not providing that, then yeah, there's a lot of great churches out there.
Stay tuned for a bonus episode to hear part 2 of this very important conversation with Denny Brewer on When Faith and Divorce Collide.